In the field of historical and archaeological discovery, there are few revelations that have the power to attract and arouse curiosity like the excavation of Jesus' tomb. A team of archaeologists embarked on a groundbreaking excavation in Jerusalem, aiming to uncover truths hidden for centuries. What they found inside the tomb caused a stir in the religious community. What is the secret of the relic? Why is it shocking? What is the hidden meaning it holds? Join me as we delve into this incredible revelation and explore the profound implications of what was discovered inside Jesus' tomb. When archaeologists swept the dust from Jesus' tomb, they made an incredible discovery. Representatives from the Roman Catholic, Armenian, and Greek Orthodox churches were among the first to inspect the interior, and they were not disappointed. According to an archaeologist who assisted with the excavation, these people left the site with beaming smiles. Since no one had opened Jesus' tomb in centuries, it was no surprise that this group was excited to take part in this historic event. Surprisingly, what they found was a cloth, and after research, archaeologists found this to be the Shroud of Turin. It was a piece of cloth with a very faint print of a man's face and body. Some believe this is the original cloth used to wrap Jesus after his crucifixion. If they are right, then this is from Jesus Christ himself. But those who believe the shroud is authentic claim that the energy released from Christ's body at the moment of resurrection created a supernatural mark. Why do people believe it was the cloth that wrapped Jesus? A cloth is mentioned as significant in all four gospel accounts: the Joseph of Arimathea's wrapping of the body and the disciples' discovery of the cloth after the resurrection, Matthew 57-59, Luke 24:12. If you think about it, the first believers at the tomb may have kept the cloth they found. However, it is difficult to prove whether this is a special fabric or not. There are records of the cloth we now know as the Shroud of Turin from the Middle Ages, but its authenticity has been questioned throughout that time. Those who believe it to be true claim that there have been records of Jesus' burial cloth throughout church history, but they must admit that there is not much historical evidence that this particular shroud is similar to the cloth mentioned in previous records. Those lucky enough to have had a close look at the shroud agree that although the faint image of the shroud wearer is visible from a distance, the mark cannot be seen at close range. What is it meaning? The Shroud of Turin has been preserved since 1578, measuring 4.3 meters or 14 feet 3 inches long and 1.1 meters or 3 feet 7 inches wide. It appears to depict two light brown images, the back and the front of a thin, sunken-eyed person, 5 feet 7 inches tall, as if a body were placed alongside one half of the shroud, while the other half was folded in half over the head to cover the entire front of the body from face to feet. The images contain signs said to correspond to Jesus' crucifixion wounds, including thorns on his head, lacerations on his back, as if from beatings, bruises on his shoulders, and more. Various stains are believed to be blood. People murmur that these stains are sacred memories of the supreme sacrifice on behalf of. It is important to remember that the Catholic Church does not officially declare the authenticity of a relic. The Church does not claim to be a mere symbol of Christian devotion, but it does acknowledge that it serves as a symbol of the mystery of the Lord's passion and death for millions of visitors since the late 19th century. How did the amazing experiments surrounding the Shroud of Turin take place? In 1898, scientists made a striking observation. The sepia tone images on the shroud bore an uncanny resemblance to photographic negatives rather than genuine photos. In 1988, the Vatican resolved to end the authenticity debate once and for all. They sent microscopic samples of the shroud's linen cloth to 3 laboratories in different countries, each about the size of a postage stamp. The goal was to carbon-14 date these samples to determine the age of the shroud. To their surprise, all 3 laboratories independently determined that the textile was manufactured between 1260 and 1390 for nearly a century. Scientists have worked tirelessly to research this revered artifact in the hopes of finding a definitive answer. Despite the use of the most advanced scientific technology available today, no one has been able to replicate the mystery image it carries. Nonetheless, scientific advancement has resulted in the gradual disclosure of new evidence, bolstering the case for the Shroud of Turin's authenticity. One scientist also suspected that bacteria were responsible for the shroud's ethereal image. His idea was that, as the crucified man was dying, bacteria such as the common skin bacterium Staphylococcus epidermi would invade and multiply in his bloody wounds. creating a thin layer called a biofilm. Biofilms can absorb water like a sponge. After the man died and the body was washed, the biofilm absorbed water and became extremely sticky. Then, when the shroud is placed on the body, it will adhere quickly, allowing bacteria to move into the fibers. Over time, bacterial decomposition will create pale yellow marks on the face and body that gradually darken as photographed. I have previously observed bacteria drying on surfaces and noticed that they leave a straw yellow color similar to that observed in the Shroud of Turin. He said, "The key to the color change is unsaturated fatty acids commonly found in the membranes of all types of cells, including bacteria. The addition of oxygen atoms to fatty acid molecules, or oxidation, changes their chemical composition, creating a yellow color." Similarly, Mattingly said, "The yellow color seen around the collar ring is due to fatty acids from the body and bacteria that have rubbed against the collar." In an ongoing series of experiments to prove his theory, Mattingly has taken bacteria samples from his own skin and cultured them to create biofilms. After killing the bugs to prevent infection, he applied the film again to the skin and covered it with linen. The fabric adheres easily, but more importantly, a photo-like image will form on the fabric as the bacteria oxidize. In the images created by his own hands, Mattingly's wedding ring can be clearly seen. "The image," he said, "isn't perfect, but it's very close. The hand is easy to use because it is mostly skin and bones. When applied to the face, there is fatty tissue around the cheeks, making the image flatter, because the linen layer adheres very tightly to the skin. Remove the fatty tissue and hydrated tissue, as you would have in someone who has lost almost all the fluids in the body, and you will have skin over the bones, thus getting a much better." Mattingly is currently conducting tests to isolate the chemical compounds that create the yellow color. He is also trying to improve the quality of facial images. I have been interested in the Shroud of Turin for 44 years, and it has fascinated me for the historical, archaeological, and scientific mystery it represents. It is important to make it clear that this is not a question of faith. Even if the shroud were a fake, the Christian faith would not be tainted by it. There have been many forgeries in history, and obviously, the belief in the truths of faith, of the death and resurrection of Jesus, has not been questioned. It remains that the shroud gives us information about the passion of Christ. We know, for example, that he was flogged very violently, in the Roman way, and not in the Jewish way, with a flagrum, which had 2 small balls and a barbell between them, the trace of which can be seen under a microscope. We can see that he was indeed crowned with thorns, that he was speared on the right side. The type of Roman spear used has even been identified, as there were several of them. The examination of the shroud leads us inevitably to the mystery of the resurrection. Although this burial cloth is not in itself a proof of the resurrection, which can only be experienced and understood through faith, but it does give us some very unsettling clues. It is certain that I was really surprised by the results of the carbon-14 analysis in 1988 to 89, insofar as they were in contradiction with very reliable previous works, such as those of Professor Pierre Barbet of the St. Joseph Hospital, who established a relationship between the Passion of Jesus and all the available information about the shroud, or those of Professor Paul Vignon in the 1930s, showing an absolute and perfect correspondence between the iconography of Christ, which appeared as early as the end of the 4th century, and the face of the man on the shroud. A change of iconographic model occurred at this time, which corresponds to the arrival of this precious linen in the city of Edessa in present-day Turkey. It therefore seems impossible that a forgery could have been made in the Middle Ages, in the years 1260 to 1390, that is, the range provided by the radiocarbon laboratories. In addition, since 1978, the work of STURP, the American research group created by John Jackson, which had the shroud at its disposal for 2 days and carried out, with several tons of material, very thorough analyses, including microchemical tests of spectrography, infrared radiometry studies, optical microscopy, ultraviolet fluorescence, etc., demonstrating that the author was not a medieval forger. I quickly wondered about the reliability of the carbon-14 study. Statistical studies showed immediately that there were absolutely insurmountable discrepancies between certain figures provided by the Oxford Laboratory and those of Zurich in Switzerland and Tucson, Arizona. So what does the science say? It depends on who you believe. For the detailed case for the shroud's authenticity and a critique of the British Museum's methods in 1988, You can look at Rolf's website, hookaneb.com. He cites scientific researchers who agree with him. You could try reading the scientific research papers on Google Scholar, or the very long wiki page, which has lots of contested statements, but the current page is mainly skeptical. Premier Christianity previously reported that some apologists are using the shroud as evidence for the resurrection, and their arguments have helped convince some skeptics to embrace the Christian faith. It's a complicated subject. If you want to try to work it out, good luck. I thought the Catholic Church believes it is authentic. I'm sure I read about a pope blessing it, or something. Historically, popes have disagreed if it is genuine. However, the Catholic Church teaches that images of Jesus have appeared miraculously in a number of different contexts, and these images can be used in devotion. So even though the shroud is honored and displayed at key events, the Catholic Church doesn't have a position one way or the other on whether the shroud was really the cloth that wrapped Jesus. A full-size replica has been on display at various Catholic sites in London in February 2023. What is the meaning of the Shroud of Turin? The shroud is the famous cloth, housed in Turin, Italy, which many believe to be the burial cloth of Jesus Christ. It is 14 feet long by 3 feet wide and contains faint images of a nude, bloodied, crucified man, lying in a death pose, seen from both the front and the back. The shroud was largely written off in 1988, when radiocarbon dating concluded it originated in the Middle Ages, not in 30 AD. In the minds of many, this test was powerful enough to overrule a mountain of previous scientific evidence that supported the shroud's authenticity. Now, however, the shroud is being reassessed, in part because the accuracy of the radiocarbon dating is being called into question. The big question about the shroud has always been, is it the authentic burial cloth of Jesus of Nazareth? That question, however, will merely be my starting point. For even when we answer that one, if we ever do, we are still faced with a further, larger question. What is the meaning of the shroud? What is its relevance for our lives? I consider this the largest question because meaning is what moves us. Facts by themselves, stripped of all meaning, have no impact on us. Only once we assign them a meaning do they ignite our emotions and impel our lives. Therefore, after an initial section on the science of the shroud, the main thrust of this article will be highly speculative. I don't see how we can avoid such speculation, where meaning is not contained in the facts themselves. It requires a leap beyond the facts, and we all take such leaps. For instance, simply thinking that the shroud has significance shows that one has gone beyond the facts and assigned it some kind of meaning. I merely wish to move this process of assigning meaning out into the open, into a public forum. How you respond to the meanings I present will to a large extent be determined by your worldview. Worldviews function as interpretive frameworks that tell us how to handle the facts that come our way. They tell us how to draw lines between facts, how to connect the dots. They tell us which speculative leaps are merely short, justified hops and which are impossible long jumps. If your worldview has two components in particular, then my conjectures might sound like a few short hops. If not, this article will probably strike you as an exercise in leaping out into empty space. Those two components are, you believe that there is something crucial and momentous about Jesus, but that our understanding of him has been imperfect and can be illuminated by historical research. And you believe that science is a highly valuable tool in the search for truth, yet you also believe that miracles can happen. What is the Shroud of Turin? The Shroud of Turin is a 14-foot cloth with a man sketched into it. No other historical document has been scientifically examined to the extent that the shroud has. As Father Spitzer explains, the extensive studies of the shroud have revealed that there are certain enigmas that almost certainly suggest that the shroud is subject to divine causes, a perfect, three-dimensional image. The Shroud of Turin represents the figure etched into it with incredible detail, despite being made from extremely sensitive cloth. The full body can be seen in the image, and has been confusing to many scientists. Even those who have attempted to disprove any semblance of divine influence. Problems with 1988 carbon dating of the Shroud of Turin. In 1988, 7 samples were taken from the Shroud of Turin in order to conduct carbon dating to determine the year of origin. However, instead of following the natural protocol of taking 7 samples to be examined by 7 different labs, only 3 samples were taken from one corner of the Shroud of Turin. The scientists Joseph Marino and Sue Bendard found cotton fibers believed to have originated in the 15th century. However, Dr. Raymond Rogers conducted a vanillin test, which dates the decoy and fabric over time. The test showed that vanillin levels were low in the shroud, and that its origin could be traced back to sometime before the 3rd century. The vanillin content was too low for the shroud to have been made before that time. Additionally, after conducting infrared spectroscopy tests, Rogers found that all results showed an average date of AD 50, plus or minus about 500 years, with 96% certainty. External references for place and date of the Shroud of Turin. Next, Father Spitzer explains multiple pieces of evidence that demonstrate the origin of the Shroud of Turin being traced back to the time and place of Jesus Christ. Dr. Max Fay found pollen grains within the Shroud of Turin, which is indigenous to Judea, particularly northern Jerusalem. He discovered that the cloth was exposed in northern Judea for some time, moved to Odessa, Turkey, and then finally to Constantinople. In fact, right around the time when the shroud was believed to have come to Odessa, a radical shift coincidentally occurred in Christian iconography, depicting Jesus more as a Semitic man with dark features and long hair, exactly how he is seen on the. For a long time, people could not understand why there were 2 Roman leptons on the eyelids of the man in the shroud. There were unique coins that could not be traced back to any origin other than the fact that they were Roman. However, a study found that the coins possessed a special minting, which was done by Pontius Pilate in Jerusalem in the year AD 29. This correlation is beyond coincidental, as this was exactly around the bloodstains on the Shroud of Turin. Another startling piece of evidence comes in the form of the bloodstains on the shroud. In fact, the bloodstains on the image have been shown to have originated before the image was even present on the cloth. All the wounds are vertically juxtaposed, showing that whoever is on the cloth suffered a death by crucifixion. Additionally, the bloodstains show severe stress, which demonstrates that an artist did not create the shroud, but actually contains blood, genuine hemoglobin, with an AB type. The wounds that are found on the shroud show head wounds from the crown of thorns, wounds on the side from a Roman pilum, and wounds on the wrists, feet, and ankles from the nails. The likelihood of all of the 124 bloodstains being identical is close to impossible, yet they are. More evidence for the Shroud of Turin. As Father Spitzer explains, there is no other image like the Shroud of Turin in the history of the world. He gives 5 major pieces of evidence for its unique status. The Shroud of Turin is a precise photographic negative taken on a photographically sensitive cloth in a time when photographs did not exist. The image has been proven not to have been produced by paint, dye, vapors, or scorching, implying that it was not created by an artist. The image of the Shroud of Turin is restricted to the uppermost parts of the fibrils in the cloth and does not penetrate into the medulla of the fiber. There is no other image that has done this. The blood imprints on the shroud preceded the formation of the actual image. 3D imaging of the shroud shows bones inside the hand and flesh surrounding the bone. What Father Spitzer demonstrates is that the Shroud of Turin is no ordinary image. In fact, by supplying a myriad of evidence, Father shows that the Shroud of Turin originated around the year AD 29 in Judea. It is a perfect photographic negative of a man who underwent a unique crucifixion, and there is no other image like it. Although many will still deny the spiritual implications of the shroud, the evidence is becoming increasingly hard to deny. The weave is a herringbone pattern with the twist of the yarn being a Z-twist, meaning the spindle was rotated clockwise. The cloth also has a high thread count which produced a fine cloth. Although such cloth was not common, it was not unusual at the time of the Lord, especially in the Middle East area. Moreover, cotton fibers particular to the kind of cotton found in Palestine are also present in the linen cloth. Pollen evidence also places the origins of the shroud in the Middle East. Pollen, because of its outer shell, the exine, can survive literally tens of thousands of years. Dr. Max Frey of the University of Zurich and founder of the Zurich Criminal Police's Scientific Service found pollen, spores, and molds common to the habitats of the places where the shroud had been reported. He also found pollen from halophytes, plants typical of the desert regions around the Jordan Valley and adapted to live in the soils with the high salt content found almost exclusively around the Dead Sea area. The shroud depicts the image of a man, slightly under 6 feet tall, who suffered the brutal death of crucifixion. The wound marks evidenced by blood stains correspond with the sufferings our Lord endured as described in the Gospel. Nail wounds appear at the feet. Interestingly, the nail at the wrist would have penetrated a nerve, and caused the thumb to snap into the palm. The thumbs of the man in the shroud are hidden due to this nailing. The shroud does show a wound to the side, as where the soldier's lance would have pierced the heart of our Lord. The spear passed through the 5th and 6th ribs and pierced the pericardium and the right auricle, causing the flow of blood and pericardial fluid. Bloodstains around the forehead and nape of the neck could be attributed to the crown of thorns. Bloodstains also appear across the back, alternating right and left shoulders, and on the buttocks due to scourging. The scourge wounds fan out, which makes sense since the flagellum used by the Romans had 2 or 3 leather thongs with small lead balls or hooks at the end to gouge the flesh of the victim. Clearly, the victim was whipped very methodically, and over 120 wound sites are present. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.